walk into my office and just see so many people sitting there. So, what are you here for? My secretary didn't tell me I had anything. Yeah, here it is. A crumpled piece of paper. I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Presidency, but you can just call me Prez. Don't call me Your Highness or Your Majesty or anything like that. We fought a war to get away from that after all. I guess you're here to learn a little bit more about myself. Let's see. I was conceived in 1787 and wasn't actually born until 1789 when the people thought I'd be a good idea. Between you and I look pretty dang good for being 227 years old. Just saying. In my life, I've worked with a wide variety of people, from 5-star generals to a peanut farmer from Georgia, to a big guy like Howard Taft, to a tall, skinny guy like Abe Lincoln. I've worked with young guys, I've worked with old guys. Heck, I've even worked with a guy who couldn't even use his legs that well. Come to think of it, this past 8 years, I've gotten the honor to work with the first African-American president. Now, I haven't worked with a woman president, though that could very possibly change this year. But no matter who I've worked with over the years, one thing's remained constant. That's me. I've had to lead during times of war and famine, through peace and prosperity, and it's a difficult job with a lot of different duties. So, I'm going to tell you more about that. Also, I have some friends coming in later on who might be able to explain things a little bit better than I can. So the first one of my responsibilities is chief of the party. Now, me myself, I'm not really a party person, but some people who associate with me do. Now, going forward, I'm the head of whatever party elects me. In some countries, it's whoever runs their legislative branch, but with us, we're independent of the Congress, and we can elect whoever we want to work with me. Now, whether that be a Republican, a Democrat, a Whig, someone from the Green Party, they become the official leader of that party for however long they're in office. Now, an example of this goes when I leave office and I go and campaign for others who may need my help across the country getting into office and making sure my party wins. This was seen in the 2012 Democratic National Convention when former partner of mine, Bill Clinton, got up and endorsed Obama by saying, "I want someone who's cool on the outside, but burns for America on the inside." Now, normally that's an endorsement I would shy away from because the whole, but it helped him win an election and he got another 4 years. But I haven't always supported party politics like this. My first friend and greatest ally, George Washington himself. Oh, hey George, look pretty good there. my greatest friend George there, he warned America of party politics and how it could endanger society, and well, he put it a lot better than I did, so I'll let him tell you more about it.
I have already intimated to you the danger of parties of the state, with particular reference to the founding of them on geographical discriminations. Let me now take a more comprehensive view, and warn you in the most solemn manner against the baneful effects of the spirit of party generally. This spirit, unfortunately, is inseparable from our nature, having its root in the strongest passions of the human mind. It exists under different shapes in all governments, more or less stifled, controlled, or repressed, but in those of the popular form, it is seen in its greatest rankness, and is truly their worst enemy. The alternate domination of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge, natural to party dissension, which in different ages and countries has perpetrated the most horrid enormities, is itself a frightful despotism. But this leads at length to a more formal and permanent despotism. The disorders and miseries which result gradually incline the minds of men to seek security and repose in the absolute power of an individual, and sooner or later the chief of some prevailing faction, more able or more fortunate than his competitors, turns this disposition to the purposes of his own elevation, on the ruins of public liberty. Without looking forward to an extremity of this kind, which nevertheless ought not to be entirely out of sight, the common and continual mischiefs of the spirit of party are sufficient to make it the interest and duty of a wise people to discourage and restrain it.
Going forward, I want to uphold Washington's legacy and make sure that we don't divide the people based on ideology. If we divide them, we no longer are united. We become enemies with each other, and that is the last thing we need in this country. Now, another one of my responsibilities is chief of state. In some countries, for example, England, they have an unofficial, more ceremonial head of state. Take Queen Elizabeth II, for example. She goes around and knights people like so, and we don't need that. We're America. We broke up with them. It's over. But we still do ceremonial things here, whether it be welcoming the 2015 World Series champions, the Kansas City Royals, to the office, or throwing out the first pitch of the baseball season, a tradition started by Bill Taft himself and continued every season since, well, except for 3 years under the Carter administration. Don't ask me about him. He was a bit of a nut, if you ask me. Anyway, one of my favorite traditions is the annual turkey party celebration done at Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is a special holiday to us. It's uniquely American, where we celebrate friends, family, football, and, of course, food. Now, part of this Thanksgiving food are turkeys, and I have the opportunity to make sure that one turkey survives that season for at least another year, and so that they can go back to their friends and family and celebrate their own Thanksgiving. Now, some people think that's a funny tradition that started under my good friend H.W., but I personally like it. I get to use it to shed some light on opportunities that I might not otherwise. For example, in 2013, my current partner, Barack Obama, look at that. My current partner, Barack Obama, used that opportunity to shed light on poverty and homelessness and to get a message across that he wanted to change things in inner city D.C.
On a more serious note, later today, Michelle, Malia, Sasha, and I will bring a couple less fortunate turkeys to a great organization that works to help out our neighbors here in D.C. Who need it most. And I want to thank Jandel's Turkey Farm in Orfield, Pennsylvania, for donating those dressed birds for the 5th year in a row. This is a reminder that this is a season not only be thankful for the incredible blessings that we have, but also to remember the neediest and generously serve those who are not as fortunate. This is a quintessentially American holiday. And during this time, we give thanks to our friends and our family, for citizens who show compassion to those in need, and for neighbors who help strangers they've never met. We give thanks for the blessings of freedom and opportunity that previous generations worked so hard to secure for, and we give thanks for the service and sacrifice of our brave men and women in uniform who serve our nation around the world. For those of you who are watching, you keep us safe, you make us proud, and you remind us of our own obligations to build on the work of our predecessors and leave something better for our own kids.
No, not everything can be all fun and games like I'd like them to be. I'd honestly be rather out on the golf course all day golfing. But I do have a job to do. One of my biggest jobs is chief executive. In this role, I run the country, and although I do try to do it by myself, some more so than others, I go around and I surround myself with the best and brightest minds in the nation in fields ranging from economics to transportation and the environment to human health. These individuals make up my cabinet. Now, sometimes it's necessary for me to make new members of my cabinet. In 2001, we were attacked. September 11th, thousands of Americans were killed in a vicious terrorist attack, the bloodiest on American soil. Following that, I worked with my friend George W. Bush to create the Department of Homeland Security. We made sure that Americans were safe. We made sure that our borders were safe, and we have tried our hardest ever since to make sure an event like that never happens on American soil again. And I think Bush can explain it a little bit better.
The Homeland Security Act of 2002 takes the next critical steps in defending our country. The continuing threat of terrorism, the threat of mass murder on our own soil, will be met with a unified, effective response. Dozens of agencies charged with Homeland Security will now be located within one cabinet department, with the mandate and legal authority to protect our people. America will be better able to respond to any future attacks, to reduce our vulnerability, and most important, prevent the terrorists from taking innocent American lives. The Department of Homeland Security will have nearly 170,000 employees, dedicated professionals who will wake up each morning with the overriding duty of protecting their fellow citizens. As federal workers, they have rights, and those rights will be fully protected. And I'm grateful that the Congress listened to my concerns and retained the authority of the President to put the right people in the right place at the right time in the defense of our country. I have great confidence in the men and women who will serve in this department and in the man I've asked to lead it. As I prepare to sign this bill into law, I'm pleased to announce that I will nominate Governor Tom Ridge as our nation's first Secretary of Homeland Security.
Even putting in place ambassadors to either the United Nations or our embassies across the country. Either way, this allows me to serve as Chief Diplomat of the United States. I'm able to reach out and talk to different individuals. Now, this has been a tradition long in progress, as we've been allies ever since day one with our oldest and closest ally, France. And we've worked on relations since then. In World War I, my friend Woodrow Wilson led the country and made sure that Americans were safe during the war, but also that the world was a safer place. He laid down the foundations, the League of Nations, which would later on become the United Nations. Then, who could forget my good old friend Teddy Roosevelt? His speak softly and carry a big stick policy made the Western Hemisphere a safe place from Europeans. He made sure that no European would be able to come in and colonize South America, Central America. This created a peace that was interrupted by World War I, and then lasted a little longer, but then interrupted by war again, when World War II broke out. We fought hard. We made sure that Europe stayed free. Although it was broken after we were done, they looked east to make sure they had someone to look to. And they found the Soviet Union and communism. And thinking they could fix their problems with it, they returned to slavery of communism instead of the freedoms of democracy. They were subject to human rights. They were subject to not having enough food to eat. So this sparked a Cold War that lasted throughout much of the 20th century. And then finally, at the end of the 80s, we start to saw crumbles in the Berlin Wall. And my good friend Ronald Reagan, the great communicator himself, he traveled to Berlin to give a speech to the Soviet Union, to encourage those fighting for freedom to keep fighting, and to make sure that communism in Europe would fall.
Behind me stands a wall that encircles the free sectors of this city, part of a vast system of barriers that divides the entire continent of Europe. From the Baltic south, those barriers cut across Germany in a gash of barbed wire, concrete, dog runs, and guard towers. Farther south, there may be no visible, no obvious wall, but there remain armed guards and checkpoints all the same. Still a restriction on the right to travel. Still an instrument to impose upon ordinary men and women the will of a totalitarian state. Yet it is here in Berlin where the wall emerges most clearly. Here, cutting across your city, where the news photo and the television screen have imprinted this brutal division of a continent upon the mind of the world. Standing before the Brandenburg Gate, every man is a German, separated from his fellow men. Every man is a Berliner, forced to look upon a scar. President von Weizsäcker has said the German question is open as long as the Brandenburg Gate is closed. Today I say, as long as this gate is closed, as long as this scar of a wall is permitted to stand, it is not the German question alone that remains open, but the question of freedom for all mankind. Now the Soviets themselves may, in a limited way, be coming to understand the importance of freedom. We hear much from Moscow about a new policy of reform and openness. Some political prisoners have been released. Certain foreign news broadcasts are no longer being jammed. Some economic enterprises have been permitted to operate with greater freedom from state control. Are these the beginnings of profound changes in the Soviet state, or are they token gestures intended to raise false hopes in the West or to strengthen the Soviet system without changing it? We welcome change and openness, for we believe that freedom and security go together, that the advance of human liberty can only strengthen the cause of world peace. There is one sign the Soviets can make that would be unmistakable, that would advance dramatically the cause of freedom and peace. General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Now, who here likes money? Good, because I'm in charge of that too. Well, sort of. Ever since George started leading the nation in the 1790s, we made sure that there was a national bank in place. And we worked with an old friend of ours who's recently hit Broadway fame. You may know him. His name's Alexander Hamilton. To create the first national bank. And in order to do this, we had the goals of setting up... Oh, what am I doing? Alexander can tell you a little bit more about it himself in a more entertaining fashion, in fact.
If we assume the debts, the union gets a new line of credit, a financial diuretic, how do you not get it? If we're aggressive and competitive, the union gets a boost, you rather give it a sedative?
Well, I always get credit for the economy whenever it's up or down, seemingly more so when it's down than when it's up. And please, whatever you do, don't remind me of Hoover flags. They're pretty fresh in my memory still, so don't worry, I know that. But, you know, sometimes I just don't get the credit when the economy is doing that well. This wasn't the case in the 1930s and when we were recovering. One of my strongest partners, Franklin D. Roosevelt, he saved the economy. He brought forth a new deal for Americans that would create jobs and prosperity in the United States to bring us from the brink of economic collapse and the Great Depression. He started policies like the Social Security Administration, the Work Progress Administration, and other vital organizations to help the United States get back on her feet. And in his 1933 inaugural address, Franklin, well, he laid out what would become the linchpin of his administration.
Our greatest primary task is to put people to work. This is no unsolvable problem if we face it wisely and courageously. It can be accomplished in part by direct recruiting by the government itself. treating the task as we would treat the emergency of a war, but at the same time, through this employment, accomplishing greatly needed projects to stimulate and reorganize the use of our great natural resources. Hand in hand with that, we must frankly recognize the overbalance of population in our industrial centers, and by engaging on a national scale in a redistribution, endeavor to provide a better use of the land for those best fitted for the land. Yes, the task can be helped by definite efforts to raise the values of agricultural products, and with this the power to purchase the output of our cities. It can be helped by preventing realistically the tragedy of the growing loss through foreclosure of our small homes and our farms. It can be helped by insistence that the federal, the state, and the local governments act forthwith on the demand that their cost be drastically reduced. It can be helped by the unifying of relief activities which today are often scattered, uneconomical, unequal. It can be helped by national planning for and supervision of all forms of transportation and of communications and other utilities that have a definitely public character. There are many ways in which it can be helped, but it can never be helped by merely talking about it. We must act quickly. And finally, in our progress towards a resumption of work, we require two safeguards against a return of the evils of the old order. There must be a strict supervision of all banking and credits and investments. There must be an end to speculation with other people's money. And there must be provision for an adequate but sound currency. These, my friends, are the lines of attack. I shall presently urge upon a new Congress in special session detailed measures for their fulfillment, and I shall seek the immediate assistance of the 48 states.
You hear Franklin talk about Congress there a little bit. Normally I don't have any congressional authority. All I do is sign bills or veto them if I don't agree with them. But from time to time I do get to use my power to influence them. Once a year I get to interrupt your favorite television broadcast to come on your TV screen to give my State of the Union address. And then you have to sit there and listen to me for 30 minutes to an hour. Sorry, not sorry. You get to see me. But I use this chance to set an agenda and let the Congress know what I'd like to see done. Additionally, a lot of people work in the Congress before coming and working with me. They work as senators, as representatives, and then work their way up and know what it's like to govern before getting the highest office in the land. This was never more so than with Lyndon Baines Johnson, who in himself was a great senator. He led the Senate in times of much reform. He was a New Dealer, and he made sure that bills got passed through under his leadership as whip, minority leader, and other offices that he held. Then, when John F. Kennedy got elected, Johnson got the nod as vice president. And then when John, well, we won't talk about that. Johnson was thrown into the presidency unexpectedly, and not knowing what he was to do, he turned what he was most familiar with, and that was the Congress. He urged them to pass legislation that would help transform the United States society. He made sure that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 got passed through. He started a war on poverty, and it was all done through his 1964 State of the Union address.
Let this session of Congress be known as the session which did more for civil rights than the last 100 sessions combined. As the session which enacted the most far-reaching tax cut of our time. As the session which declared all-out war on human poverty and unemployment in these United States. As the session which finally recognized the health needs of all of our older citizens. As the session which reformed our tangled transportation and transit policies. As the session which achieved the most effective, efficient foreign aid program ever. And as the session which helped to build more homes and more schools and more libraries and more hospitals than any single session of Congress in the history of our republic. All this and more can and must be done. It can be done by this summer. And it can be done without any increase in spending. In fact, under the budget that I shall shortly submit, it can be done with an actual reduction in federal expenditures and federal employment. We have in 1964 a unique opportunity and obligation to prove the success of our system, to disprove those cynics and critics at home and abroad who question our purpose and our competence. If we fail, if we fritter and fumble away our opportunity in needless, senseless quarrels between Democrats and Republicans, or between the House and the Senate, or between the South and the North, or between the Congress and the administration, then history will rightfully judge us harshly. But if we succeed, if we can achieve these goals by forging in this country a greater sense of union, then and only then can we take full satisfaction in the state of the union.
Well, I'll be the first to tell you I'm no longer the spry spring chicken I once was. Job takes its toll on me, and it takes its toll on anyone who decides to work with me. You no longer see, colored hair or anything. It turns to gray. Stresses of the job get to them. No job more stressful than Commander-in-Chief, but it's the most important. As Commander-in-Chief, I'm the head of the military. I make sure that the Americans are safe by making sure that our enemies aren't going to get to us, by making sure we have the strongest military in the world. We've had a long tradition of military history, starting with Washington being our first five-star general, leading us in battle in the Revolution, going to our third president, Thomas Jefferson, who led during the Barbary War, who said, that a well-armed and organized militia is critical to the United States' existence. And we maintained this record all through. Now, I have warned in the past of having too strong a military. Kansas's favorite son, Dwight D. Eisenhower. There he is. Now Ike, he was a 5-star general. He led Allied forces during World War II, and he beat the snot out of the Nazis in Europe. And he was a heck of a leader. He made sure before he left office that he warned against the military becoming too strong and too big of our national society to where it would overrun society and take away our liberties. And he warned the dangers of the military-industrial complex.
A vital element in keeping the peace is our military establishment. Our arms must be mighty, ready for instant action, so that no potential aggressor may be tempted to risk his own destruction. Our military organization today bears little relation to that known of any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
For our own defense, it is necessary that we have the most modern military. And it's just one necessity that we face. Now, one necessity which I wish wasn't the case is the loss of life. 1.3 million American soldiers have lost their lives since the beginning of our nation, defending these United States. Their names echo in my head every single day as I have to write letters to the families of the soldiers who have fallen, letting them know what has happened. It haunts me, but I will never forget their sacrifice that they have made to this country to protect the Constitution, the country, and you, the citizens. They make sure that America remains the best country on earth, that we are the most free, and we have the most liberties. Now, usually soldiers go across seas to fight battles, and we don't have to see it firsthand. But in the 19th century, we were almost torn apart by a vicious war. The American Civil War. We lost hundreds of thousands of lives. And it tore this nation apart. It pitted brother against brother on if the South should secede or if we should stay a union. But my good friend, Abe Lincoln, he made sure that the Union stayed together. He led during this bloody time, and he made sure that we came out stronger than ever. And he gave a speech on the battleground of Gettysburg, which would become the most famous American speech known. And instead of me trying to do it any justice, I'll let Abe do it himself.
77 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they here gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. That this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom. And that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
As you can see, Abe was committed to memorializing those who had fallen. But it's just as important that we help those who come back from battle, unable to find the resources that they need. Each day we have veterans who cannot get what they need to live a normal life. They cannot find the resources to make lives better for them and their families. And that's why organizations like the Wounded Warrior Project exist. The Wounded Warrior Project was founded in 2003 with the purpose of helping veterans who go to war since September 11th, 2001. And since that time, they've helped over 100,000 veterans and their families get the resources they need to be able to become normal, everyday American citizens yet again. Now, you hear on the news of the VA being corrupt, and this breaks my heart knowing that veterans cannot get the help they need. So let us help organizations that help veterans. There's a hat in the back where you can donate to the Wounded Warrior Project, and 100% of the proceeds will go to the organization to help veterans in need. And I ask that you give generously. And for those of you who are watching online, there's going to be a link below this video. So go to the website and make sure that you donate there as well. Today, I've reached out to all of you. I've told you what all I'm responsible for, and I have shown you how stressful this job can be. I have shown you the tolls it can take, and I have shown you how tough it is to be President of the United States. Now, that's an indicator that not everyone can be president, and it takes the toughest individuals to do so. So, going forward, I ask three things. First, that you remember me. Second, that you pray for me. And third, that you take part of the great American privilege and duty to vote in your elections. This year could mark a turning point in the United States history. I ask that all of you be a part of it in deciding who gets to work with me next. Good night. God bless America.